Sophie, a bright and talented 14-year-old, lived in an orphanage in Austin, Texas. Her only family was her grandmother, Margaret, who was very ill and needed surgery. Sophie was determined to help her grandmother, but didn't know how until she discovered her gift for singing. She knew she had to do something extraordinary to raise the money for Margaret's surgery. The answer came in the form of a local restaurant that hosted live performances. Jake Thompson, the restaurant manager, was a kind-hearted man in his mid-40s. He loved discovering new talent and had a soft spot for underdogs. When Sophie showed up at the restaurant, she knew it was her only chance. Despite her young age, she confidently approached Jake. "Mr. Thompson, I need a job," she said, her voice steady but her eyes pleading. Jake looked at her skeptically. "You're just a kid. This isn't a place for children." "I can sing," Sophie insisted. "Please, just give me a chance." Something in her determination moved Jake. "All right, let's hear you sing." Sophie took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to sing. Her voice was pure and powerful, captivating everyone in the restaurant. Conversation stopped, and all eyes turned to the stage. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the room erupted in applause. Jake was impressed. "You've got talent, kid. All right, I'll give you a job, but only on 2 conditions. You have to keep your grades up, and you can't tell anyone about this arrangement." Sophie agreed eagerly. She knew this was her chance to help her grandmother. At the orphanage, Emily, the cook, had always been fond of Sophie. Emily was in her early 50s and had a nurturing nature. When Sophie told her about the job, Emily was worried but supportive. "I'll help you sneak out," Emily said. "But you have to promise to be careful." Sophie nodded, grateful for Emily's support. Every night, after the other children were asleep, Emily would let Sophie out through the back door of the orphanage. Sophie would then make her way to the restaurant to perform. One evening, a wealthy businessman named Ethan Collins, who was in his early 40s, was dining at the restaurant. Ethan had recently moved to Austin and was still settling into his new life. He was a man of routine, and his visit to the restaurant was part of his regular schedule. As Sophie took the stage and began to sing, Ethan's eyes widened. She looked strikingly familiar. Memories of Anna, the woman he had loved and lost years ago, flooded back. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest and tried to stand up, but the room started spinning. He collapsed, clutching his chest. "Call an ambulance," Jake shouted, rushing to Ethan's side. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Ethan to the hospital. Sophie, shaken by the incident, stepped off the stage. Jake and Emily comforted her, telling her it wasn't her fault. The next day, Sophie visited the hospital to check on Ethan. She felt a strange connection to him and wanted to make sure he was all right. As she entered his room, Ethan's eyes fluttered open. "Who are you?" he asked weakly. "I'm Sophie," she replied. "I sing at the restaurant where you collapsed." Ethan stared at her, the resemblance to Anna too striking to ignore. "Do you know a woman named Anna?" Sophie shook her head. "No, I don't. I live with my grandmother. She raised me after my mom left." Ethan's heart sank. Could this girl be related to Anna? He had to find out more. Back at the restaurant, Jake and Emily discussed the situation. "She reminds me of someone," Jake said, "but I can't put my finger on it." Emily nodded. "She's special. We need to protect her." Over the next few days, Sophie continued to perform at the restaurant, her determination unwavering. Each performance brought her closer to her goal of raising enough money for Margaret's surgery. Meanwhile, Ethan, recovering from his heart attack, couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie was connected to his past. One evening, after another successful performance, Jake sat Sophie down. "You're amazing, Sophie, but I need to know why you're doing this." Sophie took a deep breath and told Jake everything. "My grandmother is sick. She needs surgery, and I'm trying to raise money to help her." Jake was moved by her story. "We'll help you, Sophie. You're not alone in this." As Sophie continued to sing and Ethan recovered in the hospital, the pieces of their intertwined past began to come together, setting the stage for a revelation that would change their lives forever. Ethan Collins lay in his hospital bed, unable to shake the feeling that Sophie was connected to his past. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. He remembered Anna, the love of his life, who had left him abruptly years ago. He had always wondered what became of her, and now, this young girl's resemblance to Anna stirred up those old memories. Meanwhile, Sophie continued to perform at the restaurant, her powerful voice drawing in larger crowds each night. Her grandmother Margaret's surgery was always on her mind, pushing her to give her best performance every time she stepped onto the stage. Jake Thompson, the restaurant manager, watched over her like a guardian, making sure she was safe and supported. Jake had become more than just an employer to Sophie. He was a father figure, always there with words of encouragement and advice. One evening, after the restaurant had closed, Jake and Sophie sat together, enjoying a quiet moment. "You've got a real gift, Sophie," Jake said, his voice filled with pride. "I'm proud of you." Sophie smiled, but her eyes were filled with worry. "I just hope it's enough to help Grandma. She's all I have." Jake put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll make sure she gets the help she needs. You're not alone in this." Emily, the cook at the orphanage, continued to help Sophie sneak out for her performances. Emily had developed a close bond with Jake, and their relationship had grown from mutual respect to something deeper. They often talked about Sophie and how they could best support her. One night, as Sophie prepared to leave for the restaurant, Emily handed her a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" Sophie asked, curious. "It's a dress," Emily replied. "I thought you might like something special to wear for your performances." Sophie's eyes lit up as she unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful, shimmering dress. "Thank you, Emily. This is perfect." "You're welcome, dear. Now go out there and shine," Emily said, smiling warmly. As Sophie continued to perform, Ethan's curiosity grew stronger. He needed to know more about this young girl who looked so much like Anna. Despite his doctor's advice to rest, Ethan left the hospital as soon as he was able. He made his way to the restaurant, hoping to find answers. That evening, Sophie took the stage in her new dress. The audience fell silent as she began to sing, her voice filling the room with emotion. Ethan sat in the back, watching her intently. He couldn't believe how much she resembled Anna. When the performance ended, Ethan approached Jake, who was standing by the bar. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to speak with you about Sophie." Jake eyed him warily, recognizing him as the man who had collapsed during one of Sophie's performances. "What do you want to know?" "I believe Sophie might be related to someone I knew a long time ago," Ethan explained. "Her mother, perhaps. Can you tell me more about her?" Jake hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Sophie's an orphan. She lives at the local orphanage and sings here to raise money for her grandmother's surgery." Ethan's heart ached at the thought of Sophie being alone. "I need to speak with her. Please, it's important." Reluctantly, Jake agreed. He called Sophie over, and she approached the table, looking curious and a bit nervous. "Sophie, this is Mr. Collins. He wants to talk to you." Sophie nodded politely. "Hello, Mr. Collins. How can I help you?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Sophie, do you know anything about your parents? Your mother, specifically?" Sophie shook her head. "No, I don't. My mom left me with my grandmother when I was very young. I don't even remember her name." Ethan's heart sank. "Your grandmother never mentioned anything about your mother?" Sophie thought for a moment. "Grandma said her name was Anna, but that's all I know. She never talked about her much." Ethan's eyes widened. Couldn't be a coincidence. "Anna, that's the name of the woman I loved years ago. I think she might be your mother." Sophie looked confused. "But why would she leave me?" Ethan's voice softened. "I don't know, Sophie, but I want to help you find out. Maybe together, we can uncover the truth." Jake, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "If what you're saying is true, then Sophie deserves to know. But we need to be careful. This is a lot for her to take in." Ethan nodded. "I understand. I just want to help." As they sat there, The three of them began to piece together the fragments of the past, unaware of the twists and turns that still lay ahead. The mystery of Sophie's mother and the connection to Ethan was just beginning to unfold, and the truth would change their lives forever. Days turned into weeks as Sophie, Ethan, and Jake continued their search for answers about Anna. The more they dug, the more questions arose. Sophie kept performing at the restaurant, her determination to help her grandmother fueling her every note. Jake and Emily supported her as best they could, their relationship growing stronger as they faced this journey together. Ethan, recovering from his heart attack, was more determined than ever to uncover the truth about Anna and her connection to Sophie. He spent hours poring over old photographs and letters, trying to piece together the fragments of his past with Anna. One evening, he invited Sophie and Jake to his home, hoping to share what he had found. As they sat around the table, Ethan spread out the old photos. "These are from when Anna and I were together," he explained. "We were so happy, but then she just disappeared. I never knew why." Sophie looked at the photos, trying to see any resemblance to the woman who had left her behind. "Do you think she's still out there somewhere?" she asked softly. Ethan sighed. "I hope so. I think finding her is the only way we'll get the answers we need." Jake, always the pragmatic one, leaned in. "We need to start looking into records, maybe even hire a private investigator. If Anna's still out there, someone must know where she is." Ethan nodded. "I've already made some calls. There's a private investigator named Dan who comes highly recommended. I've set up a meeting with him for tomorrow." The next day, Ethan and Sophie met with Dan, the investigator. He was a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense attitude and a keen eye for detail. "I've dealt with cases like this before," Dan said, flipping through his notebook. "We'll start with the basic records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and any known addresses. If she's in the country, we'll find her." While Dan worked on tracking down Anna, Sophie continued to perform at the restaurant. Her fame was growing, and more people came to see the young girl with the incredible voice. Jake watched over her like a protective father, making sure she was safe and supported. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, Sophie sat with Jake and Emily in the back of the restaurant. "I just want to know why she left," Sophie said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Why would a mother leave her child behind?" Emily squeezed her hand. "Sometimes people make decisions that seem impossible to understand. But whatever the reason, it's not your fault, Sophie." Jake nodded. "We'll find out the truth. And no matter what, you have a family here who cares about you." As the weeks passed, Dan uncovered bits and pieces of Anna's life. He found an old address in New York, a marriage license, and even a few photographs that suggested she had moved to Europe. But the trail was cold, and it seemed Anna had disappeared without a trace. One afternoon, Dan called Ethan with a breakthrough. "I've found something," he said. "It looks like Anna moved to France about 10 years ago. There's a small village where she might be living now." Ethan's heart raced. "Can you get us an address?" "I'm working on it," Dan replied. "But it's a small place. It shouldn't be too hard to find her once we're there." The news was both exciting and daunting. Ethan, Jake, and Sophie began making plans to travel to France, hoping to finally find the answers they'd been seeking. As they prepared for the trip, Sophie couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and fear. What if Anna didn't want to see her? What if she had moved on completely? Jake and Emily were by her side, offering words of encouragement. "No matter what happens, you're not alone," Jake said. "We're in this together." The day of their departure arrived, and the three of them boarded a plane to France. The journey was long, but the anticipation kept them alert and focused. When they arrived in the small village, they began asking around, showing pictures of Anna and hoping someone would recognize her. It didn't take long. An elderly woman at a cafe pointed them toward a small house on the outskirts of the village. "She lives there," the woman said, "but she doesn't come out much, keeps to herself." With hearts pounding, they made their way to the house. Ethan knocked on the door, and after a moment, it opened. A woman stood there, her face lined with age and sorrow. She looked at them with wary eyes, but there was no mistaking it. It was Anna. Anna, Ethan said softly, his voice trembling. It's me, Ethan. And this is Sophie. Anna's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she seemed unable to speak. Then, with a voice filled with emotion, she whispered, Sophie, is it really you? Sophie stepped forward, her heart aching with years of unanswered questions. Mom, why did you leave me? Anna's eyes filled with tears. I had to. There were things you don't understand, but I never stopped loving you. As the door slowly opened wider, the past and present collided, and the long journey toward the truth began to unfold. As Anna welcomed Sophie, Ethan, and Jake into her modest home, the air was thick with tension and unspoken questions. The years had not been kind to Anna. Her once vibrant spirit seemed weighed down by the burden of her past choices. Sophie couldn't hold back any longer. Mom, why did you leave me? Why did you leave us? Anna took a deep breath, her eyes filled with regret. I left because I thought it was the only way to give you a better life. I was young and foolish. I thought I could find a better future in Europe, but I was wrong. Ethan stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Anna, we've spent years wondering what happened. You didn't just leave me, you left Sophie too. She's been through so much. Tears streamed down Anna's face. I know, and I've regretted it every day, but I couldn't come back. I was too ashamed, too scared. I didn't know how to face you both. Sophie's heart softened, seeing the pain in her mother's eyes. Mom, I just want to understand. Did you ever think about us? Anna nodded, her voice breaking. Every single day. But I convinced myself that you were better off without me. Jake, who had been silently observing, spoke up. Anna, it's not too late to make things right. Sophie needs you now. We all need to move forward together. Anna looked at Sophie, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. I want to be part of your life, Sophie, if you'll let me. Sophie hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and embracing her mother. I want that too, Mom, but it's going to take time. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder. We'll take it one step at a time together. Over the next few days, the small group spent time together, sharing stories and rebuilding the bonds that had been broken. Anna told Sophie about her life in France, her struggles, and her regrets. Sophie shared her dreams, her love for singing, and her determination to help her grandmother. As they talked, Anna learned about Margaret's illness and Sophie's efforts to raise money for her surgery. I want to help, Anna said firmly. I owe it to both of you. Ethan nodded in agreement. We've already made arrangements for the surgery. Now that we're together, we can face this as a family. Back in Austin, Margaret's surgery was scheduled. Jake and Emily had prepared everything for her return, and they welcomed Anna into their home with open arms. It was a challenging adjustment, but they were all committed to making it work. The day of Margaret's surgery arrived, and the family waited anxiously at the hospital. When the doctor finally came out with good news, the relief was palpable. The surgery was a success, he said. Margaret is going to be just fine. Sophie, Ethan, and Anna hugged each other tightly, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Thank you, Sophie whispered. Thank you for helping us. In the following months, Sophie continued to sing, her voice even more powerful now that her heart was at peace. She won the international singing competition, and her family, Ethan, Anna, Margaret, Jake, and Emily, were there to cheer her on. Meanwhile, in a quiet village cafe in France, Anna's past caught up with her in a different way. Seeing Sophie's success on television, she realized the magnitude of what she had nearly lost. The life she had built for herself, far from the people she loved, now seemed empty and meaningless. Anna watched Sophie's performance with pride and a heavy heart, knowing that while she had finally found her way back to her family, the years apart could never be fully reclaimed. She was grateful for the chance to be part of their lives again, but the weight of her choices would always be with her. As Sophie stood on stage, holding her trophy high, she knew that her journey had only just begun. Surrounded by her reunited family, she felt stronger than ever, ready to face whatever the future held. The story of sacrifice, resilience, and the power of family had come full circle, bringing healing and hope to them all.